Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. In this podcast, Really Cool People, we get to meet some fantastic folks. The hope is that as we listen, that you and I will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity, through listening to their stories, that something within it will provoke something within us that the Spirit of God wants us to listen to or pay attention to. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to somebody who is maybe in their own mind somewhat ordinary, but they are a really cool person. Today, we're going to hear from Carolyn Larsen. Carolyn was born and raised in Santa Fe, Missouri, and she grew up to go on and get a college education. She became a teacher for a while. Then she began to work in the field of medicine. She'll talk about all those things. She also has a story about how she's mostly a head taller than her sisters. You'll want to stick around for that story. So grab your coffee, listen in close. Here's Carolyn Larsen. Welcome to Really Cool People, and today we're so thrilled to welcome Carolyn Larsen into the studios. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Jason. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. Well, let's start with your story. Tell us about you from whatever angle you want to take.
Well, let's start back when I was in elementary school.
Okay.
Now, grades 1 through 8, I attended a one-room schoolhouse, country schoolhouse, schoolroom. We had one teacher and we had 8 grades. And I was the only one in my class until I was in the 8th grade. And a girl moved into the town of Santa Fe, Missouri, and I had a classmate for the first time.
That's, I guess you were either top of your class or bottom of the class. Both, right?
I was both.
Wow.
And I was kind of the teacher's aide because I was born in 1945. So in 1946 was when the baby boomers came along. And I was the only one in my class, but there were 7 boys in the class behind me.
Wow.
So I would help the teacher with the younger kids.
Sure. And then, so you grew up in Santa Fe, had this experience of one-room schoolhouse. Then where does your story go from there?
Well, I didn't grow up in Santa Fe. I grew up in Santa Fe.
There's a difference?
There is a difference. The locals don't like you to call it Santa Fe. It's Santa Fe. Population, I believe, about 96 now. And I grew up actually on a farm just outside of Santa Fe. Then I graduated from 8th grade at Santa Fe, and then I went on to Paris High School in Paris, Missouri. Population about 1,300. And then I moved on to the University of Missouri.
Wow. What did you study in Missouri?
I studied education. I was a business education teacher. And I'll tell a little story about when I was making plans to go to the university and I was a senior and my high school English teacher said to me, "Carolyn, what are you going to do after you graduate?" And I said, "I'm going to go to MU." And she goes, "I hope you make it there." And I thought, thank you, Miss Dixon, for that confidence. But I did make it, and I graduated and got my degree, and I went on to teach.
Why do you think your high school English teacher said, "I hope you make it there"?
I'm not sure, because I was a pretty good student in high school. I made good grades. I have to admit, when I went on to the university, that my parents did not set high expectations. They wanted me to get my degree. And that's what I did. And, I thought about the fact that I didn't have a very high GPA when I graduated, but you know what? Anytime I have presented my degree on an application or anything like that, no one has ever asked to see my GPA. And for that, I'm thankful.
Do you want to disclose what your GPA was?
No.
I have this saying with my kids because all my kids have been a little driven. Mm-hmm. And And I've known a lot of other people who are driven and they focus on GPAs. I've come down to the saying that A's get accolades, B's get bonuses, C's get degrees, and D's get diplomas.
There you go.
There you go.
Well, there weren't hardly any D's, but there were a lot of C's.
A lot of
I'll say
C's.
that.
There you
Yes,
go. You
that's
got a
right.
degree.
Uh-huh.
And then after you got a degree, then what'd you do?
I
Where'd life-
moved to Illinois to teach because Missouri did not pay a very high salary back in 1967 for teachers. So I moved to Illinois and I got my first teaching job there. And that was where I met the man I married.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he wanted to get his master's degree. And so we moved to Texas, where he went to school and got his master's degree. And we lived there for about 5 years.
We're at in Texas.
Well, first we lived in Denton, Texas, which is right north of Dallas-Fort Worth. And then we taught for 2 years out in Mundy, Texas. And the joke is, where is Mundy, Texas? Well, it's halfway between Sunday and Tuesday. But it's really halfway between Abilene and Wichita Falls, out on the plains of West Texas. Completely flat property, 2-lane roads, and the speed limit is 75 miles an hour.
You said that like you like to go fast.
Sometimes. I have been known to.
About that, moving from, starting out in Illinois and then going to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of your experiences like in the classroom as a teacher? Is there anything that stands out about that time of your life?
It was so long ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was 1967. The students were different then. They were much more respective of teachers. The parents expected their students to be respective of teachers. So it was easier for teachers in 1967 than it is now.
Okay. Then move on from there. Move on from Texas or move
Okay,
on.
well, then we made a decision to move back to Missouri. I know when I was a child, I had made the decision that I would never live in the state of Missouri because I thought it was boring. But then I moved to Illinois and I lived in Texas for a while. I decided I was ready to come back to Missouri. And we moved here. But this time, right after we moved here, my second daughter was born. Melissa was born in Texas. Caroline was born in Springfield. And then I began looking for a job. And it was in the middle of the year, so they weren't hiring teachers at that time. So I was a business education teacher, so I fell back on my secretarial skills. So I applied for jobs as a secretary. And I was offered a job at Drury to be the secretary to the Dean of Graduate Studies. And it was a good job. And then I went on an interview at Smith Glen Callaway Clinic. And I fell in love with that place. And I thought, this is where I want to work. Well, I was offered the job at Drury. And as badly as I needed that job, I turned it down. But then I was hired 2 weeks later at Smith Glen Callaway, and I was there for 31 years.
Wow. How did you imagine, what was that like when you knew you needed a job, but there was this, and you had an offer, but you wanted this other one? Like,
Right.
What was that 2 weeks like?
It was hard. Actually, I had been on the interview at Smith Glen Callaway, and I was totally convinced I had aced that interview and I was going to get that job. And they called me and said they'd hired someone else. So then I called Drury back, asked them for the job, and they said no. And then within about a week, Smith Glen Callaway called me, and they had a much better job for me. And they told me, we didn't want to hire you for the first job because we wanted you for this one.
Wow.
So
What'd you do there?
I started out as a medical secretary. And I then, changed jobs over the years. Eventually, I was building manager at Smith Glen Callaway before I retired. So I just did a variety of things. I managed all the clerical staff, the secretaries and the receptionists for a long time. Then we joined Mercy and we divided into departments, and I managed some of the departments.
Because you volunteer at Schweitzer some,
Mhm.
and I've worked with somebody who got to work with you over there at Smith Glen, which was Pastor Jim Mason.
Right.
And he said, between the two of you, you both had quite a handful of stories together.
We did. We did. I always said Jim was one of the best bosses I had, and he and I were quite a team. And I remember he came in from a meeting with the higher ups at Mercy one time, and I said, "How did it go?" And he said, "They told me to be bold." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yes." And I think he and I were both pretty bold with the things we had to manage out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Jim reminded me of that story. I don't know, within the last 3-4 years, and so then for a while here, before he retired, he would point at you sometimes, say, "Be bold, Carolyn.
That's
be bold."
right. That's right.
Yeah. So you retired, and
I retired from Mercy in 2008, and the day before I retired from Mercy, I started teaching at OTC, and I taught medical terminology there for 5 years.
really,
Yes.
how did that teaching at OTC compare with your teaching in high schools?
Well, it was completely different, but my teaching degree and my teaching experience did help prepare me for the classroom at OTC. And I taught in class sessions, and I also taught online classes. So
What did you think about teaching online? I mean, the whole sense of your formation, then, I mean, how you would have worked, even in all kinds of different settings, would have been all in person, and then you're
that's right.
teaching online. What's that like?
Well, it's completely different. And what I really, really missed when I was teaching online was the contact with the students, the face-to-face contact with the students. And we had to do everything over email. And that was a little challenging, but it I got into a routine, and you didn't have to stand up and lecture before a group. They just had to pull up the lecture I had recorded, and so yeah, I got to where I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because that shows that you had the capacity to like move through changing environments. And no matter when we're born, the environment that we're born in, the environment that we continue to live in, is one that's continually changing. And so that
Right.
shows great flexibility there with you. Um, One of the things that you skipped over, or you haven't talked about yet, was like your early childhood and
Oh.
your parents and your family life.
Oh,
What
okay.
would you like to say about that?
Okay. Early childhood. When I was born up in Lebanon, Missouri, when my dad was in the Army, and I was born in October of 1945. He got out of the Army in November of 1945, and we moved up to Monroe County, Missouri, which is in the northeastern part of the state. And he did what he loved to do, and that was farm. So we lived on a farm, and we had no electricity initially. We had no indoor plumbing. It was just an old farmhouse that we lived in. And then, the modern conveniences came later. I went to the one-room schoolhouse, and this was a rural area I grew up in. I had two best friends, and we rode our bicycles. Uh, the farms were fairly close. I could ride my bicycle a half mile and be at my friend Margaret's house, or another half mile in the other direction and be at my friend Kenny and Jimmy's house,
Mm-hmm.
and then a little bit further, Mary Ellen's house. And so we did that, and it was a fun time. And I remember, we didn't have TV. We didn't have TV until, I don't even remember, maybe before I entered high school, we got TV, I think. But I read. I read everything. I read the Bobbsey twins. I read Sherry Ames books. I read all those kinds of books, and that was a fun time. Then I was born in 45. I have a sister who was born in 1953 and another one in 1959. So it was, it was fun having little sisters. And
You brought some pictures in, and you showed me pictures of you and your sisters,
Mhm.
and you said one doesn't necessarily fit.
Right,
And then you went on to tell me how tall your dad was, and
right,
you kind of tower above your sisters.
right.
So there's a story there.
There is a story there, and I'll cut it short for this podcast. But late in the 1970s, I looked into the mirror one day and I said, "You don't look like you belong to your family." And so I said, "God, will you help me figure out who I am?" And He answered me immediately, and He said, "This is not the time." And I said, "Okay." And I got it in my head that I thought there was a good chance that I had been switched at birth, because my father was 5'6", my mother was about 5'3", and when they measured me for the junior high basketball team, I was 5'11 3/4. So I went on with my life. I was divorced by this time, and I had 2 children to raise on my own, and so I went on. And I didn't think about it a whole lot. Every once in a while, it would pop up into my mind, but so I just went on. And fast forward to April of 2011, and God put a telegram in my hand that was it was sent in 1945. And He whispered in my ear, "This is the time." And so I set out to find out who I was. And in July of 1945, I sat with my mother and discovered that I had a different biological father than my sisters. And then by September of 2011, I had found my half brother's children. He was deceased, but I found my half brother's 2 sons and daughter who are living in California. We united, and we've become very close over the last few years.
Huh.
Now, there's a whole lot more to the story than that.
There is. So your parents were married, but
Right.
how was that like hearing the story from your mom?
Difficult, because it was hard for her to tell me. She thought she would take that secret to her grave. Now, I, we believed them to have been married in January of 1945. I was born in October of 1945, 4 days shy of their 9-month wedding anniversary. But we learned later they were not married until September the 11th, 1945, about 3 weeks before I was born. So you see, my dad is my hero.
Wow. What did your mom say to you? How did she unpack that?
I sat down with my mother and I said, told her how much I loved her, how much I loved Daddy. But I said, I know that Daddy was not my biological father. Will you tell me who he was? And so she hesitated, but then she spoke his name. And then I started the search and found out who I was.
Hmm.
So
That's an interesting phrase you've used there. I found out who I was.
right.
So how do you understand yourself? Like, because here's this person you've called dad all of your life.
That's right.
And you just said he was your hero. And then there's this other biological side, and
Right.
there's these other siblings.
Right.
So how do you understand that and put all that together?
Well, when I found out who my biological father was, and when I found out, when I found his descendants, I felt whole. I felt like there had been a hole in my being, but for the first time I felt whole. Now those are two different words,
Mm-hmm.
HOLE, WHOLE.
Yeah.
But I felt like I was whole because I felt like I was missing a part of myself.
So when you were growing up, did you ever have any sense in your relationship with your dad or that he ever looked at you differently than how he did your other sisters?
My dad loved me. He helped educate me. Uh, he when my first sister came along, she was an outdoors person. So she worked with him better on the farm. I
Mm.
was more of an indoor person.
Mhm.
But no, it never occurred to me that I was different from my sisters. So,
And it didn't really hit you until 19 in the 1970s.
like, right, late 1970s.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
That's fantastic. Fantastic of your dad to do that. And
yeah, he was my hero. He married my mother when she was 9 months pregnant with another man's child.
wow.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's incredible, Carolyn. That's really incredible. And he never talked about it with you.
No, no, he never talked about it. My dad died in 2002. And, I always think God's timing is always right.
Mhm.
You know, uh, I don't think I would have wanted to make this discovery while he was still living. And, I think God he put that telegram in my hand, you know, at the right time, which made me start to pursue.
Where'd you find that telegram or how'd you get it?
This was a telegram that my uncle had sent to my mother on her 18th birthday. Now, as far as I knew, my mother had married my dad when she was 17 years old. And she was definitely very pregnant with me when she turned 18. And the telegram was from my uncle who was in the Marines. This was World War II. And he just said, "Happy birthday, Helen. I'm fine. Love, Wayne." And I flipped it over to see how it was addressed, and it was addressed to her maiden name.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
then I realized at that point in time that there was, a discrepancy in the license, in the marriage license and everything, the certificate. So,
Wow. So how's that information and all that discovery, how's that shaped you since that time?
um, like I said, it's made me feel whole.
Mhm.
I've discovered a family that I didn't even know that I had. And a lot of people, when they realized I was on this search, encouraged me not to go down that path. But I'm so glad that I did. So glad that I did. So,
Why do people discourage you from pursuing this?
well, they said that I might be disappointed who I
Hmm.
found, and that I might upset the family that didn't know I existed. But they welcomed me with open arms.
Hmm.
Yes.
So have you found some commonalities along the way?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, we're all tall. we, uh, my youngest daughter looks enough like my great niece that they could be sisters.
That's an incredible story, Carolyn. Really, that's so fascinating to think about. And your dad, incredible how he stepped up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did your mom ever really talk about what their true dating life
No,
was like or how they
no,
got
no. My mother
connected?
never wanted to talk about it. So she was, um, she was embarrassed.
Hmm.
Like I said, she thought she would take this secret to her grave.
Wow.
So, at
Really?
least from me, there were other people that knew.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm. Well, let's pivot just for a bit
okay,
and let's talk about your faith story.
okay.
What was your faith journey like? What's that been like over the years?
Well, I remember this, and I know that I remember this when I think about 4 years old. One Sunday morning, my mother came into my room and said, "Carolyn, we're going to go to church this morning. Would you like to go to church?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." So we went to church. We went to the Santa Fe Christian Church, and this was a small country church that started in 1838 and is still going strong. And that's where I grew up. I grew up in that church. It was the Disciples of Christ Church. And, we were there every Sunday morning. We didn't have Wednesday evening or Sunday evening services. That we would have revivals. Oh my gosh, the revivals were big in the 50s. And we would have preachers come in and preach, and the whole town would turn out for that. And, I was in the youth group and so on, and till I graduated from high school. Then I went to the University of Missouri, and the big Baptist church, my roommate told me we ought to go there. So we did. We'd get up and dress up on Sunday morning and walk down to the church, and Monk Bryan was the minister. I know his son and his grandson, I think, have become ministers since. So I did that. Then after I got married, wherever we moved, we always found a church. Moved back to Springfield, and I counted up. I think I've attended 6 different churches in Springfield.
Wow.
And now I'm here at Schweitzer, and I plan to stay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of churches. You sound like you could have been in the ministry.
Oh, I don't think so.
Moving all those churches.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. You did talk about, you met the man that you married,
Mhm.
and you had 2 kids,
Mhm.
and then you got divorced.
Right.
How do you think about those times? Or
Oh, those were hard times. And interestingly enough, after my ex-husband and I divorced, we became good friends. As a matter of fact, I hosted his 70th birthday party.
really?
I did. And he died in December, and I was listed as a survivor in his obituary.
You did become good friends.
We did become good friends. Mhm. Yeah.
How? Well, okay. So I've got a number of questions around that. Like, how did the friendship develop? And
Yeah, we were not good friends when we first divorced, but and he was a much better father when our children became young adults. And I wanted to make it easy on my kids,
mm-hmm.
and I didn't want them to have to go 2 Thanksgiving dinners, 2 Christmas dinners. I said, invite your dad over here, bring him over here so we can all be together. And it just worked out really well for us. I realized that wouldn't work out for all people, but it worked out well for us.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's an incredible gift of grace and mercy.
Right. Yeah. And and I know that I'm a better person for having welcomed him into my home.
Uh-huh.
And there were 2 grandchildren, and there were parties and things like that, and we were all together.
That's that is really interesting. And you talked about how your dad was a hero, but some of the things that I've heard from you, that and even this, it's a rather heroic kind of thing for you to do.
It was the right thing to do.
Yeah,
I know
well,
in my heart it was the right thing to do.
may your kids call you blessed. That's
I hope they do.
yeah, I hope so too.
Right.
Well, you brought some other things along with you.
Mhm.
What else do you have with you that you want to talk about?
Well, I want to talk about the small business that my daughter Melissa and I started back in 2020. And initially, this was COVID.
Yeah.
Initially, we made masks, and we publicized our business on Facebook, and it went really, really well. And so then, advice from a friend, she said, "You've got to form an LLC," which we did in July of 2020. We formed the LLC, and we made masks, like I said, and we shipped them all over the United States. We had requests from Canada, South Africa, Europe, and so on, but we decided we just needed to stay within the United States and not deal with the shipping to other countries.
Uh-huh.
I made over 1,100 masks, and I do all the sewing, and Melissa runs the rest of the business. And then after COVID, then we started making padded book sleeves. And we'd been making those all along, but there was really no demand for them until we got through COVID. And so we make padded book sleeves. We make them for, well, we say for hardback books, which also fits an iPad, for, softback books, soft covers. And then we make them for Kindle Paperwhites and the Oasis. I think Oasis may be a Kindle also, the devices. So we make them for devices and books. And I've made over 7,100 of those.
Wow. What do they retail for?
Well, it depends on the fabric. Some fabric's more expensive. Just an ordinary one would be, I think, about $18. And then if you bought nicer fabric, that could go up to $28. So
You've shown me a card. So you've got this Cam Creations LLC, and you can be found on Facebook and Instagram.
Right.
Now, what propelled you to get into this business piece? Was it the fact that you like to sew? Was it?
Well, I do like to sew. I'm a seamstress.
Yeah.
I remember I went to Melissa's one day and she had this padded thing. And I said to her, I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's a book sleeve." And I said, "Really? What do you do with it?" "Well, you put your book down in it." So I looked at it and I said, "Well, I could make those." And she said, "Really? You want to do it?" And so that's really how I bought some fabric and we made some. And then COVID hit and people started saying, "Will you please make masks? Will you please make masks?" And initially when Melissa said to me, "Well, you want to make masks?" And I said, "No." But then I changed my mind and made over 1,100 of them.
Wow.
And then after COVID, like I said, we went back to the book sleeves. And
who uses one? I've got a lot of books, but I've never used a book sleeve.
Well, anytime if I'm going to fly somewhere, on a plane, I put my iPad or my book down in the book sleeve. It protects it. If you're going to carry it around, and some people just like them just because they think they're cute.
They are cute.
We have over 1,500 fabrics. I'll do a little ad for our business now. We have over 1,500 fabrics, and you go online and you message Melissa, and she cuts all the fabric out and gives it to me, and I sew it up, give it back to her, and she ships it out.
So it's 7,100 book sleeves and 1,100 masks. Have you made any money on it? Are you in the black?
Year before last, we made $75,000.
Wow.
And yeah, we're doing well. This last year has not been as good. I think the market's getting saturated, or there's less interest in book sleeves now. Business is down somewhat, but so.
So are you thinking about doing something different with your seamstress skills?
Not at this point in time. Haven't come up with any ideas.
So that's what they talk about in small business, right? You've got to be able to pivot.
That's right.
From one thing to the next.
That's right. That's right.
So. Maybe you need to make something like baseball season's coming up. Maybe a baseball player needs something unique.
Maybe. I don't know. If you think of anything, Jason, let me know.
I'll see if I can do that. My goodness. Well, one of the things that you said early on was that you're one of the questions that I like to ask folks is what are they looking forward to in the future? And you're like, I don't know about what the future is going to hold, but you've got to certainly have some things that you're looking forward to.
Well, not a whole lot. I will tell you that, when I was in high school, I heard one of my friends say to another friend, "My mom and dad are going to take me and my brother to all 50 states." And I thought, I want to do that. So I have traveled to all 50 states. And I've done some other traveling. I went to the Holy Land, which was, just, I can't even describe that, I realized that I was walking where Jesus walked, and it was just, was unbelievable. I couldn't believe it,
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 1950s, parents always bought their children sets of encyclopedias.
Oh, yes.
And I love to go through the encyclopedias. And when I saw the Eiffel Tower, I said, someday I will go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. So I've done that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Is there any place on earth that you really you'd want to go back to?
There's a place I'd like to go. I'd like to go to Australia.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go to Asia. I've been to England, I guess, 2 or 3 times. I guess 2 times. And I've been to France, and I've been all over the United States. But I'd like to go to Australia. But I'll let my passport expire.
Fret not. They can always
always
issue a new one.
That's right. So.
Yeah.
But as far as in the future, I don't have a lot of plans. I get up every morning and I say, God, make me the person you created me to be today. And sometimes at the end of the day, I will say, God, I didn't do very good today, but I will try harder tomorrow to be the person you created me to be. I want to make a difference in people's lives. And sometimes it's just a smile to a stranger. And sometimes it's other things that I can do.
Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of skill and capacity, and you've been a great help and great contribution in the everyday life of Schweitzer. And
well, thank you.
And it's been fantastic to have you be a part of our volunteer office team, and it's been a real treat and pleasure. So, one of the things I like to ask people near the end of an interview is do you have a bit of wisdom that you kind of live by, or that you like to share with other people?
I guess I want to do better today than I did yesterday. I remember one time my mother, I had just awakened, and my mother had heard a quote, and she attributed it to Colin Powell, and I'm not sure he's the one that did it, but he said, when you wake up, get up. When you get up, do something. And yeah, I try to do something to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. And I'm very limited in my skills and ability to do that.
Oh, no, you're not, but that's okay. Well, Carolyn, it has been great to hear your story. It's been great to sit and talk with you.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, to appreciate the places where you've been, and to know that you were from Santa Fe.
That's right.
Not Santa Fe.
That's right.
And then you've had a lovely life touring, and I've met your daughters. They're lovely people, and to see God's grace at work in and through a lot of different things, and to think about your dad and the hero that he is. So
that's right.
Thanks for sharing all that with us. And you are a really cool person.
Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
My pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. A big thank you to Carolyn for sharing her story. In listening, it's my hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people who are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.